When you step off the dock onto a fountain and you crank the engines and you push the throttles forward and the boat pops up on plane, it's what you can't see about that fountain that sets it apart from all the competitors. In the late 70s, Reggie took his knowledge of an Allison craft and incorporated that into an offshore hull. At the time, offshore hulls were deep V with really large lifting strakes to give it lift. And the deep V didn't have a notch transom and they didn't run very well. Reggie knew that by notching the transom, he was able to raise the outdrives higher and the boat would still get on plane. By raising the outdrives higher, it created less forward drag, so therefore the boat ran faster. In addition to raising the outdrives by notching the transom, he added a keel pad down the keel of the boat. Now at that time, nobody in offshore style hulls had a pad keel on their boat. And that did a couple of things. The padded keel gave lift to the boat. And you say, well, why do we need this lift? Well, air is 784 times less dense than water. So if a boat drags down in the water, it's going to create more drag. If you get that same boat with the same weight to ride higher out of the water, more into the air, which is less dense, out of the water, which is more dense, the boat's going to run faster. So back in the day, the deep V's had large lifting strakes and that caused them to pound really bad. Reggie's design added a keel pad and smaller lifting strakes with different dead rises, depends on the panel of the bottom. This was such a unique deal that keel pad added more than just lift, because when a boat runs through the water and is jumping in and out of the waves, the last thing to leave the water and the first thing back into the water as it dances across the tops of those waves is the keel. And if you look at a keel pad, it has a groove down both sides, and that groove adds to the directional stability of that hull. That's one thing that's not really well known in this industry. That pad does something in directional stability other than give lift. Now, so yes, it gives lift, that's a good thing. And yes, it gives directional stability. That's why almost every fountain that you ride in the ocean doesn't bow steer like the competition. Fountain power boats didn't develop a step bottom hull, but through all of its research and development back in the 90s, it perfected it. And it perfected it by trial and error. There's no engineering related to how steps go in a boat on the hull bottom, the spacing, how it relates to the center of gravity, or the angles of those panels between the steps that make up the hull bottom. Steps in the hull bottom reduce drag by 3 different ways. Now, the reason we want to reduce drag is the engines that hang on the transom, we'll say 400 mercuries. 300 or 400 mercuries on the transom has a finite amount of thrust. That thrust that put out by those 3 engines, regardless what transom it is on, regardless of the boat, is only going to give out so much thrust. In order for that boat to move through the water, the thrust has to overcome the amount of drag. So if the hull has less drag, those same 3 engines with a finite amount of thrust is going to push that boat faster, or it's going to make the boat cruise from point A to point B on less fuel. The second thing that a step boat does is vent it to the atmosphere. The atmospheric pressure creates an air bubble under the bottom of the boat. We call that air entrainment. That's when small bubbles of air get mixed up into the water and drag back under the bottom of the boat. When that drag back under the bottom of the boat of the small bubbles reduces the hydrodynamic drag of the hull bottom. The third thing that a step bottom boat does is when you get the angles of the different parts of the hull bottom correct, it adds trim angle to the boat. So when the area in front of the front step is on one angle, and then the area between the 2 steps is at a different angle, and then the area of the hull bottom behind the aft step that carries the largest part of the load is on a different angle. And those separate angles adds dynamic trim to the attitude of the boat. We call this angle of attack or dynamic trim. Everybody knows when you run a boat, you trim the drive out and it leverages the front of the bow up, and that creates less hydrodynamic drag on the hull bottom? Well, a step bottom boat that has the proper angles under the bottom, and fountain power boats, and we came up with those right angles through trial and error and many different bottom changes over a long period of time. We found just the right angles so that when the boat is running, even before you trim the outdrive out, it already has a positive angle of attack that creates less drag on the hull bottom and therefore makes the boat push more efficiently. Some boats you'll see have a single step, and at Fountain we use two-step. The two-step allows you to give better angles to the panels between the two steps, and it gives you a larger margin for error of where your center of gravity fore and aft. A fore and aft center of gravity as it relates to the two steps is critically important. If you have two steps, you can have a larger margin of error for the exact center of gravity. A triple engine boat is going to have a little more aft gravity. A boat that's got twin engines is going to have a little more forward gravity. A boat that has a lot of equipment and stuff that's loaded on the bow is going to have a little more forward center of gravity. We're talking about fore and aft center of gravity. And that being the case, if a two-step boat will still perform well and give a larger margin of error for exactly where that center of gravity needs to be. So years ago, before Reggie ever put a pad on a notch transom, there certainly weren't any offshore fish boats with step bottoms and a transom extension and a keel pad. Since then, you'll notice almost every boat out there has different variations of pads and keel pads and notch transoms and steps. Here's the thing, at Fountain Power Boats, we perfected it first, and we're still the standard by which everybody else tries to emulate.